James checked his bank account the way most people check a text message from someone they're avoiding. Fast. Flinching. $142.17. 4 days before payday. Not an accident. Not a bad month. Just normal. The way it had been normal for years. 6 months later, James checked his bank account without flinching. He wasn't rich. He wasn't a different person. But something had fundamentally changed in how those two numbers, the one on the screen and the one in his head, related to each other. Here's what should bother you about that. Nothing dramatic happened in those 6 months. No raise, no windfall, no sudden discipline transplant. What happened instead were 6 specific shifts, one a month, each one small enough to seem unremarkable on its own, and stacked together, they rebuilt his entire relationship with money from the ground up. I'm going to walk you through all 6 months in order, because the order is the part almost nobody gets right. And by the end, you'll know exactly which month to start on. This month, if you're where James was. Before month 1, here's what James's financial life actually looked like. Not the version he told people, the real one. $142.17 in checking, 4 days before payday most months. A credit card sitting at $4,300, minimum payments only. Interest quietly growing faster than he was paying it down. No savings account, or technically one, opened years ago, containing $60, untouched, essentially decorative. He wasn't reckless. He'd never missed rent. He just had a financial life that required every single dollar of his paycheck to survive, with nothing left over to even think about anything else. The worst part wasn't the numbers. It was the checking. Every time he opened the app, his stomach tightened a little, whether the news was good or bad that day. That feeling, dread before information, is the real starting point of this story, more than any specific dollar amount. Month 1. James didn't cut a single expense. No dramatic budget, no coffee ban. He did exactly one thing, and it took him about 10 minutes on a Sunday night. He wrote down every single transaction from the previous 30 days. Not categorized, not judged, just written down. Every subscription, every takeout order, every small purchase he'd forgotten about the moment he made it. Here's the mistake almost everyone makes when they decide to fix their money. They jump straight to restriction before they've actually looked at what's happening. It's like trying to fix a leak without finding it first. You end up guessing, cutting the wrong things, and quitting within 3 weeks because the guessing feels arbitrary and exhausting. What James found when he actually wrote it down surprised him. Not one big villain expense, no single subscription explained the $142.17. It was $9.99 here, $34 there. A recurring charge for an app he'd used twice 8 months ago. 11 different subscriptions. Combined, $187 a month he genuinely hadn't registered as real money. This is the part that changes everything for most people, and it's not about the specific number. It's about the fact that you cannot fix what you refuse to look at. Most people avoid checking their account specifically because looking feels bad. But the anxiety of not knowing is almost always worse than whatever the actual number turns out to be. Do this tonight. Write down every transaction from the last 30 days. Not to judge it, just to see it. That's the entire task for month 1. Nothing else, no cutting yet. By the end of month 1, James hadn't saved a single dollar. But he'd found $187 a month in subscriptions he didn't remember signing up for, and something quieter. The dread had started, just slightly, to lift. Seeing the number, even an ugly one, is calmer than not knowing. Halfway through month 2, James almost quit. He'd canceled 6 of the 11 subscriptions, felt briefly proud, and then an unexpected $60 copay showed up the same week. And for a moment, it felt like none of it mattered, like he was back to square one before he'd even really started. He almost didn't open the app that Sunday. This is the exact moment most people give up, not in month 1, when everything's new and motivating, but here, in month 2, when the first real obstacle shows up and the old feeling comes rushing back. James opened the app anyway, and instead of reacting to the $60 copay by abandoning everything, he Did the second shift? The one that made all future progress immune to exactly this kind of moment. Here's the question almost nobody asks honestly. If saving money required willpower every single week, would you actually do it consistently for 6 months? Be honest. Almost nobody would. Willpower runs out. It gets tired exactly on the weeks when a $60 copay shows up. James set up an automatic transfer, not the aggressive number he'd fantasized about in month 1, but the smallest number that still felt like it counted. $15 a week, moved automatically the day his paycheck landed. Deliberately small. Deliberately boring. The goal wasn't the amount. The goal was making saving something that happened without requiring a decision, especially on the weeks he felt like quitting. This is the shift that turns trying to save into just saving. The $187 a month he'd freed up from canceled subscriptions went partly into that automatic transfer, and partly nowhere in particular yet, just not disappearing the way it used to. By the end of month 2, $187 saved. Not life-changing. But the account had gone from $142.17 in flinching to a number that existed on purpose, growing on a schedule, regardless of how any individual week felt. Month 3. The credit card was still sitting at roughly $4,300. Canceling subscriptions and starting small savings hadn't touched it yet, and James knew it. This is usually where people either get overwhelmed by the size of the debt and give up, or throw every spare dollar at it in a way that isn't sustainable and burns out by month 4. James did neither. He did the third shift instead. Here's the math nobody explains clearly. If you're only making minimum payments on a high-interest card, a huge percentage of that payment is going straight to interest, not the actual balance. You can pay for years and barely move the number, not because you're bad with money, but because the math is quietly working against you. James's first move wasn't to attack the balance aggressively. It was to call the card company and ask directly if there was a lower rate option or hardship program available. Something almost nobody thinks to simply ask for. He got a modest rate reduction, enough to mean more of each payment actually chipped into the balance instead of vanishing into interest. Then, and only then, did he redirect a specific amount, not everything, just $75 a month beyond the minimum, toward the card, chosen because it was sustainable enough that he wouldn't quit by month 5 out of exhaustion. By the end of month 3, card balance down to $3,890. Not dramatic. But for the first time in years, the number was reliably shrinking instead of hovering or growing. Month 4. A friend posted from a weekend trip. Flights, a nice hotel, the kind of post that used to make James feel like he was falling behind everyone his age. This time, something had shifted in how he read it. He'd heard, months earlier, that this same friend was carrying over $15,000 in credit card debt behind the photos. Nobody posts the debt. Only the trip. A huge amount of financial anxiety comes from comparing your real numbers to other people's curated ones. Social media makes this specifically worse. You're not comparing yourself to a neighbor anymore. You're comparing yourself to thousands of edited moments from people whose actual financial situation you never see. James made a deliberate decision around month 4 to stop letting other people's visible spending define whether he was behind. Not through bitterness, just by recognizing that a trip photo tells you nothing real about someone's finances. The person posting from the resort might be deep in debt. The person he used to feel embarrassed driving next to might have more saved than anyone in the group. The only comparison that mattered now was between his numbers this month and his numbers last month. Everyone else's highlight reel was irrelevant data, and once he actually believed that, a specific kind of tension around money, the comparison tension, not the survival tension, started to fade. By month 4, James had $562 saved, and the card down to $3,340. Small numbers still. But something had shifted that had nothing to do with the size of the numbers. Most financial stress doesn't come from not having enough money in some abstract sense. It comes from having no margin, no gap between what comes in and what's required to go out. When your spending requires everything you earn, every surprise becomes a small crisis. Which bill gets delayed? Which card absorbs it? Which week becomes the tight week? James's $562 wasn't enough to make him wealthy by any definition. But it was enough that a $200 surprise, which happened again, a car issue, right on schedule with month four's chaos, became an inconvenience instead of a spiral. He paid it from savings, felt a brief pinch, and moved on with his week. 6 months earlier, that same $200 surprise would have meant a new balance on the credit card and a week of quiet panic. This is the part that's hard to put a number on, but it's arguably the most important shift in the entire 6 months. Margin doesn't just protect your money. It protects your ability to think clearly about your money instead of making every decision from a place of low-grade panic. Month 5. James wanted a new pair of headphones. His old ones had been dying for weeks. 6 months earlier, this would have been a 2-minute decision. See it, want it, buy it, worry about it later if at all. This time something different happened first. James had started asking a different question before non-essential purchases. Not, can I afford this? But what will this actually cost me per use, based on how I really behave, not how I hope I'll behave? The $180 headphones he was looking at would get used daily, for years probably, under $1 a use, easily justified. He bought them, guilt-free, because the math actually supported it. But the exercise itself, pausing before buying, running the math instead of reacting, had become the real habit, more valuable than any single purchase decision. This same question, applied backward, revealed something uncomfortable. The $650 gaming chair he'd bought 18 months earlier, used maybe a dozen times since, worked out to over $50 per use. He hadn't been bad with money buying that, he'd simply never had a framework for catching decisions like it before they happened. 6 months in, $1,340 saved. The credit card down to $2,180 on a trajectory that, for the first time, had an actual end date instead of stretching indefinitely into the future. 11 subscriptions down to 3, all of which he actually used. None of these numbers, individually, sound like a movie. Nobody's going to make a documentary about $1,340. But here's what actually changed. The thing the numbers alone don't capture. James opened his banking app that Sunday, the same ritual that used to make his stomach tighten, and felt nothing dramatic, just information. A number he understood that reflected decisions he'd actually made on purpose. Here's what almost nobody tells you about fixing your finances. The moment things get better isn't usually a big number. It's the moment checking your account stops being a small daily act of dread. That shift, from flinching to informed, is worth more than the $1,340 because it's the thing that makes every future month easier than the last one. Compare month 0 and month 6 side by side. Same city. Roughly the same salary. No raise, no windfall. The entire difference between the two Jameses is 6 specific decisions, made one at a time, in an order that mattered. See the real numbers first. Automate something small before anything else. Stop the debt from growing before attacking it aggressively. Stop comparing yourself to what you can't verify. Build margin before you build wealth. And finally, replace impulse with a 5-second question. If you're where James was at month 0, $142 and flinching, a card that only ever grows, a savings account that's more decorative than real, you don't need 6 months of willpower. You need month 1. Open the app tonight and just look, not to fix anything yet, just to see it. Everything else in this video only works after that first uncomfortable 10-minute look. If this helped you see your own next 6 months differently, subscribe. I break down exactly this kind of financial psychology every week.